Myself, back in 2008, I remember when President Obama said this, I believe to the San Francisco Chronicle, in an interview. It's cut number 8, and here is the president speaking to what would happen to the price of coal. And in describing this, we get what we pay for and roll it.
The problem is, can you get the American people to say this is really important and force their representatives to do the right thing? That requires mobilizing a citizenry. That requires them understanding what is at stake. And climate change is a great example. When I was asked earlier about the issue of coal, under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Even, regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal-powered plants, natural gas, you name whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
And we have Dr. Julio Friedman, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Clean Coal at the Department of Energy, told the House lawmakers that the first generation of carbon capture and storage technology would increase wholesale electricity prices by 70 or 80%. And this is part of the global warming climate change war that President Obama has put us in. That comes to us, by the way, courtesy of Daniel Greenfield's article on frontpagemag.com. Professor, when you see a president that is being rejected ostensibly, especially in the light of the House turning to the Republicans and holding there, he had both houses before, and not able to sell the American people what he wants to do, and then says with pride, hey, I'm going to use my pen. Should we be worried?
You better be worried, because since he can't get the legislation he wants, he's likely to direct the Environmental Protection Agency, which costs this country close to $500 billion a year in regulatory costs, to impose virtual cap and trade on coal-fired electric plants, and everybody's electricity is going to reach what we already have here in California, because the state has done a similar thing. So, it doesn't matter what the people want. I mean, remember, these are progressives. This means that they know better than the rest of us. They're smarter. And they feel justified in using whatever means to establish policy that will achieve the goals they have set, and that they think, whether sincerely or not, is going to make everything better for everybody. And this is just ludicrous. The president was in my town today in Fresno, because in the valley here, it produces half the fruits and vegetables for the country. We've had a drought. It's not unprecedented. We've had them before. They're cyclical. Southern Pacific gets warm, high-pressure ridge sits up north of us and doesn't let rain come in. But, of course, he came and said, well, this is climate change, like the big storm back east is climate change. Everything is climate change. But, of course, it's just the natural cycles of climate in this region or any region of the world. And we don't have a clue what those cycles are, how long they last. People have only been in California keeping records, accurate records, for maybe 150 years. Okay? So we don't know what the weather patterns of drought, of heavy rainfall are, whether they last 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, or whatever. So this is ludicrous. This is nothing but politics, as you shrewdly point out with your clip. Politics to engineer a kind of society that they want, no matter what the cost. And if this sort of nonsense continues, in California, you're going to, wherever you are in the country, you're going to see it in your grocery store when you go to buy a lot of food products.
We've been incredibly blessed not to experience what many experienced in the 70s, as I understand it, and that is me being born in 1971, but understanding Nixon's price controls and how they impacted things and the costs of groceries. Relatively, we've been really blessed. We haven't felt the extremes when it comes to that, and what you're pointing to, it sounds like, yeah, we're going to feel it.
Well, we can.
And would you agree with my statement? I mean, maybe
Yeah.
I'm discounting something, but I'm thinking they've done we haven't felt the types of shocks like, for example, they're talking about, and you've mentioned with energy prices. Energy is calculated; it's not part of the inflation index, which kind of is odd. But bottom line, this is going to hit us all, and we've seen patterns of when you hit this, the means of production, you're going to feel it each and every place.
No, I think we could. I remember the 70s. Unfortunately, I'm that much older than you.
You don't look it.
And, in many ways, I think it was still worse in the 70s than it has been recently. I know people who have lost jobs and stuff might not think so, but it was pretty bad. And it was because of the oil embargo and the way that the price of gasoline shot up, and then Nixon's misguided attempt to use price controls, et cetera. And inflation, remember stagflation, high inflation and low growth. We've had relatively low growth, but we've had low inflation. Back then, it was low growth and high inflation and high unemployment. So we can go back to that. There's no question that could happen. More specifically, in terms of climate change and its impact on food, what's been going on in California is something you would expect from an enemy. Because what hasn't been talked about, and I've been watching the news this afternoon covering the president's visit to Fresno, and even on Fox, where they didn't point out the really important fact about, Steve Hayes did, and that is that for the past years, we've been dumping about 1.5 million acre feet, 1.6 million acre feet of water into the Pacific Ocean. Now, that's enough water for 3.2 million families for a whole year. All right? In other words, this is water that's captured by existing reservoirs and then was dumped into the ocean because they're trying to protect a little bait fish called the Delta smelt, right? Because it's allegedly endangered. And some people have this vision of restoring the salmon runs up the San Joaquin River. Now, the problem with before the dams, the San Joaquin, all the rivers that come from the Sierra into the valley, right? In the spring runoff, you get all the eastern valleys full of swamps. By the end of summer, they've all dried up. There's no water rushing down to the ocean, only on very heavy wet years. So what they did was they built the dams, they capture the water, then you can distribute it when it's needed for agriculture. Now, what we should be doing is building more dams in the Sierra to capture this water, stop dumping water into the Pacific. We've done that in the wet years like 2010. We still would have had reductions, but we would have had water that we could now use in dry years. I mean, it's wisdom that Daniel knew or Joseph knew. Who was it? The 7 lean years and the 7 fat years? This is just common sense. Right. And that we are hostage to a well-heeled, affluent Bay Area, mostly Southern California elites who don't have to worry about jobs being lost, who can afford to pay more for their food, right? We're hostage to their policies so they can indulge this cult-like fantasy about harmony with nature and all this nonsense. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, and it's when you mentioned that in your article, we don't realize. I mean, a lot of the stuff that, especially when it comes to using the resources and applying what we have and the ability to do so. So many people remember we turn on the water, it comes on, there it is. Okay, prices go up. We're not connecting the dots.